everybody. Evan Jackson, CEO of Young, Bold, and Regal. We're here with the amazing Sophia Stanley, Esquire, a premier lawyer and powerhouse, not only in the Hollywood area, but worldwide. Let me list up some of her amazing accomplishments. She's co-president of Sony's Black Employees organization. She's executive director of litigation operations. She has been in this sphere, in this world for a very long time, and she loves entertainment just like you and I. So welcome to Young, Bold, and Regal. And tell us how you got started and how you melded this love of entertainment and you being a lawyer. How did it all come together?
Ooh, well, first of all, Evan, thank you so much for that introduction. I am very rarely at a loss for words, which you will probably see as we kind of progress and get to know one another. So thank you so much for that. So, I was one of those little kids, and I say this, that I came out of the womb talking. I just came out, I was always talking, I always had an opinion, and I had an opinion about everything. And weirdly, and the only reason I say weirdly is I don't have an accent. So I was actually born in London to Jamaican parents. And so we emigrated here when I was about 2 years old. And so at the time, it was eons ago, even though I look younger, the number one show I watched at the time was Sesame Street, right? And Sesame Street was just such an amalgamation of these diverse individuals and these diverse characters, right? And on Sesame Street, there were actually people who looked like me, right? Whether or not they were real people or puppet people. However, when I was watching other television shows, no one looked like me. And at a very, very early age, I started to ask my mom questions about why it was, that TV was this thing that I loved to do and consume, and why people didn't look like me. And so that was from a very, very early age. And so, as I was growing up and I talked a lot and I always had an opinion about everything, it was almost very natural for everyone in my world to say, this one's going to be a lawyer, right? So that track was almost predestined or predetermined. And so fast forward, when I went to law school though, I actually thought I was going to do civil rights and civil justice. And the reason being, I think, was, partly I was that little kid who was always asking why there weren't more individuals, specifically Black individuals, who were playing in whatever space I was playing in. And fortunately for me, I have, two parents that are very community minded. They never stifled that desire for me to engage in that conversation. And at the time, Johnny Cochran and those types of individuals who really were using the law as a tool of words, right? Those were the individuals that I looked up to. And so when I was in law school, that's what I intended to pursue, and that's what I intended to study. And I think it was just on some levels divine that while I was in law school, I did a couple of internships, and I really had a moment where I was like, oh my goodness, to do civil rights or civil justice, you have to be touched by God. It is emotional, grueling work where if your entire being and you're not necessarily willing to be of service in that way or really dedicate your entire life, it can really be a struggle that at that time I wasn't prepared for. And so I think I was really lucky because I remember being on the internet and I remember seeing chatter about the first iteration of Oscars So White before that was actually a hashtag, right? And the NAACP in particular was starting this conversation around seeing Black faces in front of the camera. Right. And so that just I was like, oh, and the way they made the argument and the way they made the causation between having people in front of the camera and the need to have more Black people behind the camera made me realize that even though in my own world, I had such an array of family and friends who were Black from every, corner of the world that were just exceptional artists, whether or not they were actors or directors or painters or whoever it was, right? That I realized that normally very few people said something to the effect of, oh, that little kid's going to be the next Michael Jordan. No one says, oh, but that little kid's going to be his lawyer, right? No one says, that that kid is so dramatic. He's so amazing. He's going to be Denzel Washington. And no one says, oh, and I'm going to be his agent, right? Mm-hmm. And so I very quickly realized that my heart posture to want to go into civil rights could actually be redirected into the entertainment sphere, because having someone who looked like me and had the desire and the belief that we should have a more comprehensive, definitive, sustainable seat at the table, as well as have the right and the space and the breadth to create our own table, you would need people who were behind the camera to facilitate that. And in essence, that was step one of me pivoting and saying, I'm going to do entertainment. And then that's kind of where it started. I could go on and on. As you can tell, I kind of love talking, but I'll stop there.
That was great. We want you to talk more about that, but I want you to interject and say exactly how, you know, we see on the TV, and a lot of people see red carpet recaps, and they see the big stars, but they don't recognize the backbone of the entertainment industry are the lawyers, are the cinematographers, are the producers who greenlight it, are the executives who greenlight it as well. And some of these people involved in some people's teams that we know and love 10, 20 years ago, they have multiple clients. They're actually more influential than you actually know. And they really move and push Hollywood forward in a lot of steps. So I like that you're passionate about it, and I love that you combine both your love for entertainment and your love for your field and brought it together. And speak more about that, because I feel that that's incredibly important. This morning we had the NAACP Image Award nominations, right? Shout out to Marcy Martin, Issa Rae, Lawrence Fishburne. Tomorrow we're gonna have the Golden Globe nominations, and the day after that we're gonna have the SAG-AFTRA nominations. So that's a lot of people behind the scenes, right? But I wanted to ask you to continue again, how important is it to have Black representation on the executive and administration level in every aspect as well?
I would say it is equally as important, if not more so. And this is why. Because I think that now being on the ground, I knew this before, right? So I knew this from a feeling perspective and in my isolated world, back on the East Coast, not being involved in Hollywood, that there was an overabundance of Black talent, right? So that's never been a question for me, that there is just a myriad of Black talent. Mm-hmm. However, now that I've worked in the industry, and to your point, I recognize that there can be an abundance of Black talent, but if the gatekeeper are gatekeepers, right? Mm-hmm. They don't see that talent of value, then oftentimes things don't move forward. And one of the things, and I'm going to quote it incorrectly, but I think it was, after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, mm-hmm. there was a more outward communication of people behind the scenes in Hollywood, Black and brown, communicating their reality, and not only their reality, but a lot of things that they have heard or have been said to them in the room as to why, in fact, either a Black story can't move forward or a Black character cannot move forward. So I'm going to pick my words carefully, and I'm going to use me as an example, as an example to not get anyone in trouble. So people often approach me and say things like, oh my God, it must be so cool that you're the first person in your family to go to college. And I said, why do you think that I'm the first person in my family to go to college? And they're like, well, I mean, you know. And I'm like, no, actually, my mom's an organic chemist. She has a PhD. I'm not, right? Uh-huh. Fast forward, people say things like, oh my God, it must have been, so hard for you growing up X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, no, that's not how I grew up. I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston, and I was one of the only Black kids, and I lived in a community where we didn't even lock our doors. And so my safety issue wasn't an issue of having to lock my door. My safety issue was the issue of the white kids always trying to dictate who I was supposed to be, right? So my safety reality was not one of being in a certain socioeconomic aspect, right? But there's always this assumption when I deal with certain types of people that is the assumption. The reason I bring that up is that same assumption can be made with characters, right? So for instance, and I could get it wrong, but I think it was Thandie Newton or someone very recently came out and said something to the effect of, you know, they wanted the character to be more something, right? And she was like, or it was unbelievable for her to speak multiple languages, or it was unbelievable for her to be from X, Y, and Z, right? And that's that limiting construct of how some individuals view us, right? And so ideally, and I've seen it firsthand, the more you have Black individuals at the table, if that's the first part, and then a diverse breadth of Black individuals, right? Because we all know that even though there's a through line that I think is like the beauty of who we are, we're also all very different and unique, right? So that allows us to have that conversation. That allows us to say, no, that character is actually valid, or the character is actually one-dimensional. You're doing the flat, normal Black best friend, right? But you're not doing the like Black best friend who's your soulmate, and like you guys came up together, and like that best friend can actually tell you when you're being racist because you guys are actually friends / family, right? When you have Black people at the table, not only arguably can they see themselves in the story, right? Because oftentimes that's what's told, right? That even though this is not how it's articulated, because they can't see themselves in a story, right? They don't think the story is viable or marketable because they're viewing through a very limited lens of them, right? So I feel very passionately that when you have Black executives, and more importantly, Black decision makers, not only can they see themselves in the story, but also too, ironically, we're actually more likely to greenlight even if we don't see ourselves in the story. Because think about the amount of content we consume. We're nowhere, right? But for us, good content is good content. It's a bonus and an extra when in fact we actually not only see ourselves, but see ourselves as fully realized, authentic characters who are neither stereotypical and or quote unquote perfect. And that's a whole other concept of like making us a little bit too perfect, because then that makes us not real and not tangible. And then the consumer or the viewer can't actually really connect.
And to use an example, I read an article when Black Panther came out, and it says in a world where essentially almost everybody is Black, there isn't such thing as a Black villain, it's just a villain. So it takes off that extra coat of racism, and it makes us fully realize.
No, and you're spot on, and I'm so upset because there's a film I just watched on Netflix, and I think I'm gonna get it wrong. I think it's called Behind the Wire or Beyond the Wire.
Yeah, Beyond the Wire
Beyond the Wire. I just watched it, and it's exactly that, right? When the entire world is Black, right? And even and ironically, this in particular was not within the construct of a white world, but the main characters were in fact Black. Then to your point, there's a certain aspect of racism that not only is it removed, but when it's used in terms of the reality of life, but not necessarily as a sword that's wielded, right? Because I don't know about anyone else, but I know that I oftentimes watch TV or films, and I feel like racism is being used as like a ploy when it's not written by us, right? It's kind of like they just like to throw it in there, but it's literally like, right? But it's literally like, no, because on some level, sometimes if that's not the nature of the movie or the content, you now have a shut off, right? Because it's kind of like, can I just like exist in some Afrofuturistic world that's amazing and phenomenal? Like I like fantasy and anime and all that other stuff like that. So why are you bringing that in here, which is different than drama or something where in fact that layer makes sense within the dialogue and the story arc and how we're telling the story from point A to point B. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I was telling somebody the other day that I feel we're moving a new direction in Hollywood where we're focusing less on Black trauma, not that Black trauma is realized or the only thing about Black people, but we're focusing on Black love with Sylvie's Love, nominated this morning for Image Awards, right? A beautiful writing by Eugene Ash. Tessa Thompson does amazing that, and the actor plays across from him does a great job. talking about Black familial love with Queen Sugar and sagas and stuff like that, to where those beautiful stories are being told. So I wanted to ask you, what is your specific role within Sony? What do you do, and how do you want to expand your role as well?
Woo! I should have been prepared for that question. So this is probably the toughest one for me. So I'm gonna bifurcate it. I'm gonna do, because I wear two hats. So my day job, for lack of a better word, is, again, I'm the executive director of litigation operations. And so to put that in a very kind of nice box, my job is to mitigate risk as it pertains to legal liability. And so what that means is we produce content, and it is very important for us to protect the intellectual property of our content. And so that means whether or not we are being sued wrongfully or suing someone, it is my job from a financial perspective to analyze that risk. And so, for instance, if something only costs $1, right? So the value of the property is only $1, we would never want to spend $1 million. Right? So it's really making sure that the two match. And so for the most part, I communicate with both external and internal partners to make sure that everyone's aware of the properties that need to be protected, and in essence, notifying everyone who needs to know along the pipeline to make sure that we get a favorable, not only result, but the bottom line in terms of what we spend is less than what the property is worth. But more importantly, once we've kind of done a risk analysis forecast, that it makes sense within that number. And I know that's very, very heady. And also too, fortunately or unfortunately, because I work in litigation, the majority of what I do in that space is confidential. And that's arguably why that's kind of like my least favorite question. And then the second thing that I do, and that's also a little bit bittersweet because my term is actually coming to an end, is that I am the current co-president of the Black Employee Business Resource Group. And just to kind of give you a very, very quick snapshot, I started off as communications chair. I was president for about 2 years, and now I'm co-president as I'm passing the torch to the next generation, the next class. And that arguably has been the best thing that I've ever done. And the reason being is it has allowed me to take the analytical legal mindset that I use in my quote unquote day job, and then infuse that with my passion of being able to interface with multiple departments, our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, our HR, motion pictures, casting, various things, and really get an overview of what we do from a creative perspective, and then add my voice to how it is that we can continue to amplify Black voices. And the reason I say it that way is, again, I'm a talker. And I think one of the beautiful things about not only going to law school, but again, even in your introduction of saying, Sophia Stanley Esquire, is it validates your ability to speak up, but on some levels, it gives you credibility for why it is you should be heard. Right? So there's kind of a through line, and whether or not it's true or not, you hear someone's a lawyer, sometimes you may not like them, but you very rarely question their intelligence, right? Or you very rarely question their ability to make a valid or a good argument. Again, you could disagree with it, but usually their ability to do so is kind of exceptional. And so what it has allowed me to do, without less necessarily having an actual project, it's allowed me to highlight where we can make better relationships. It allows me to highlight where we're able to have events to showcase and celebrate who we are. So for instance, in particular, one of the things that I was extremely proud of late is when obviously there was this two meteors that collided at once, and I think it completely changed our world. And one of which was COVID, or the pandemic. I don't know sometimes who can say what word. And then the other was the murder of George Floyd, right? And I especially feel that for Black employees who work in the entertainment space, it was a pivotal moment for us. And this is why. There had been previous individuals who had been murdered at the hands of police. And unfortunately, because of the system and the environment that we live in, from a corporate setting as well as a non-corporate setting, we're just taught to like deal with it, right? So we're taught to just deal with it, come to work, put a smile on our face, and regardless of what someone says on the other side, we don't have the authority or the agency or the space or the grace to react.
Yeah, to react or to speak about it or to get an opinion on it.
Right. And I don't know what it was, and I don't know if it's because we were all at home. I don't know if because we were all at home, it was like everywhere in a different way. I don't know if because we were working from home, there was a layer of whether or not you call it code switching or your corporate uniform or your corporate face, that somehow that got broken. And the number of people, including myself, who were like, I couldn't do anything. Like I was stuck, and I don't live in a world where I cannot work, for lack of a better word. Again, I work in litigation, right? So things have to get done. There is no, I'm having a bad day, so forth and so on, right?
Are no breaks.
There are no breaks. And I realized that luckily what I think happened during that conversation is it allowed me to realize why it is that I was the president of the Black Employee Business Resource Group. And the first thing that I am extremely proud of is the sense of community, right? The sense of someone basically knowing exactly what you're going through, while at the same time being open to what you're going through also may be different, but literally kind of virtually in the safest and most consent appropriate way to give you a virtual hug, right? And so because of that, you know, I was able to very quickly turn around with my team, and we immediately had a town hall, and we immediately addressed the issues. And I think that we did it in a way that was honest and authentic, and we validated that some people were new to this conversation, right? And that we tried to educate people of how to actually have that not be a secondary assault, right? Because sometimes people very well-meaning are like, oh my God, Sophie, can you believe this? And literally, you're kind of literally like, so you haven't been listening to me for the last 10 years when I've been telling you this. And so as we are experiencing like the 7th layer or the whatever of trauma, right? That it's literally like we had already been traumatized, and it's almost as if we had been saying, hey, I'm being victimized and no one listens. And the minute someone listens, all of a sudden it's like, oh, because now it's too raw, right? And so I feel very proud that we were able to create a space for healing, and we brought in a therapist, and we literally had the therapist from an academic perspective educate people on, and by educate I mean both Black and non-Black people, that this thing called systemic racism, we don't have to carry it. So if at any moment, and again, and it's not negating the reality that it's all around us, right? But it means that we can put it down, that it's not our job to make other people comfortable with our pain. Like we're the one who the pain is being inflicted upon, right? And I think that even though in that first conversation, beyond, you know, providing access to psychological and mental resources and having the dialogue, that we were allowed to say, like, it's okay to not be okay. And the reason I think that's important is oftentimes, again, as Black people, part of our narrative, and I think it's 100% legitimate, is that we're strong. And we are. We're strong and we're resilient, and our ability to pivot and our ability to carry like 1,000 pounds, put on another 1,000 pounds, and still be joyous and gracious and just amazing, phenomenal people to everyone around us is our superpower. But I think that sometimes we forget that unless you actually are not human, you're still a human being, and you need to be able to rest, and you need to be able to like have a moment.
Yeah, you need that release.
100%. And so, you know, in my role, I get to create those types of spaces, which are basically kind of very much just employee based and creating that sense of community, creating that sense of tribe. And then it also allows me to plan events. For instance, for Juneteenth of last year, we were very adamant that we had to have a Juneteenth event. And this may come off like a misnomer, but and this is 100% me personal, not necessarily as the president of B, but this is my personal opinion, that Black History Month, in terms of the direction of the narrative, is for everyone, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Juneteenth is ours. Everyone is invited to participate, but it is ours. And so there's a different tone, there's a different posture. And I think that with everything that was going on in the world, it was important for us as Black employees to reclaim Juneteenth in a celebratory way, in a defiant way. And so what we did is we had a joint studio mixer, and it was a 1-part joint studio mixer, and it was 1-part rally. So we had rally cries, we had Hill Harper really give an inspirational speech in terms of the history of Juneteenth, and then I interwove, the past, the present, and where it is that we're going. Chloe and Hallie performed. We had an amazing DJ. Like it was fun. It was educational. It was inspiring. But more importantly, just hearing, through the chat, the chant of when I said no justice, the chat erupted no peace. It was phenomenal. And just to give you kind of a note. So I was in a production meeting before, and I was like, okay, you guys, I'm going to do this as the moderator, as the MC. I'm going to say no justice, and I'm going to pause. And the person on the other side was like, okay, cool. So like, what do they do then? And I was like, no. I don't need to tell them what to do. Yeah. They know what to do. Do you know what I mean? Like they know what to do. And
universal language.
Right. It's a language, right? It's a rhythm. It's a harmony that we are just a part of it, right? And I think it's jumping around. It's part of why Wakanda resonated with us, right? Because it really was like, it's like, oh, this is our birthright, right? Like there's just certain things that no matter whether, and I'm being deliberate, but regardless of whether we're like the cool Black girl or the awkward Black girl or the nerdy Black girl, or you know what I'm trying to say? Like there's this through line to who we are. And so in my role, I get to explore that and have those types of conversations. And again, the only reason I say that it's also with a heavy heart is because that tenure is coming to a close, because it's very important for me to, pass the torch to make sure that in my time that I was creating a space for other phenomenal Black leaders to percolate and come up and be able to now change the direction and change who is amplified and really just always have it evolve so that there really is this newness to it. And so that we recognize that this thing that we articulate as Blackness is like both evolving and sustainable.
And that was beautifully said. And I like that we're also in an era of more awareness of Black ownership. And as you talked about when you do with your litigation, which I won't talk about the confidential side.
Yeah.
But I always tell people, own your IP.
Oh.
After I'm done recording this, it will save on my desktop, and I will own this after making several copies in perpetuity, right? So that one day when Young, Bold, and Regal has its own channel on TV, I could have it on TV. When we interview you for a 3rd or 4th time, in another amazing role that you'll have, somebody will be able to stream this on their smart TV. How important is ownership, as you've seen it from the role you play, and then on top of that, Black ownership of the content that we put out and that we should be owning, but people aren't making the steps?
So first of all, Evan, before I move on, I applaud you. I applaud you for already knowing that, and the fact that you already have put it into practice in terms of ownership. So similar to my thought process in terms of Black executives, I feel it is equally as important in terms of ownership. The only caveat is I'd actually say ownership is more important, and this is why. If you don't own it, then it at any moment also can change. Right? So this thing that you birthed or this thing that you created, because you don't own it now, unfortunately, usually it gets watered down or diluted in a way that is no longer your thing. So that's just the first part from a creative perspective. From a financial and legal perspective, because you don't own it, there are certain rights and revenue streams that you have now given up, right? And arguably, back to kind of the genesis of how I pivoted to wanting to be in the entertainment space. And this is going to sound weird, but more so than a lawyer, I really kind of consider myself like an entertainment strategist. Right. And so that's kind of like basically you can come and bring anything to me and tell me what you want and where you see the hole is, or you may not even know where the hole is. And I am extremely good at reverse engineering and creating a plan of attack of wherein you may not be seeing revenue, opportunities, or even doing one thing which will actually free you up to be more creative to then create more content, right? Because I very much believe if you get your ownership and you understand the business and you have structure, then it allows you space to dance. But if you do not understand ownership, if you do not understand your business, if you do not have structure to what you do, then arguably that eventually will come to bite you. And even if you don't realize, it's kind of in the back of your head, right? It's kind of like smog. Sometimes we don't see smog, but it's still affecting our lungs, right? And so because of that, you're kind of always nervous or anxious. But the minute you take care of that, you're like, it's mine. And because it's mine, you walk different, right? You walk into a room different because you know that not only do you have full control of the thing from a legal perspective, but also from a creative perspective. I think it is the most important thing. And to give you a little context, when I first moved here, I wanted to be an agent. That did not happen because I was not going to work in the mailroom. I slightly regret it. I watched Jerry Maguire. I was like, that's me. I talk really fast. I curse a lot. Like
nowadays, like I'm convinced the mailroom is the unsung like foundation and bedground of everything. You read like Charles D. King from Stay Macro. He talks a little bit about that.
No,
Wow.
And he literally, and this is gonna sound corny, he's literally, I have like a handful of North Stars, right? He is a North Star in this industry for exactly what you said. Because I think that unfortunately, and again, this is only, let's say my narrative, but I think it's a couple other people. So for me, unfortunately, I could not understand how I went to law school and went into a significant amount of debt. And then someone was telling me that I had to work in the mailroom for $25,000 while living in Los Angeles, California. Like my brain was like, does not compute. Like it just didn't make sense to me. However, if in fact I had had either a mentor or someone who had come before me who understood entertainment and, to your point, was able to educate me on why it is necessary to go from the bottom to the top, right? Because again, and it may sound counterintuitive, that's who I am as a person. Like you should definitely know and respect all aspects of any business, right? But in my mind, it just didn't make sense to me because I was like, no, I went to law school. I can jump in right here because that's why I went to law school, without recognizing, oh, it's important because, and for those who may not know, because you're in the mailroom, you get to learn everything. It's a semblance of a boot camp. So you get to know everything in terms of contracts, memoranda. You get to know who's who are the players in the game, both internally at your agency and outside in the world, as well as the fact that you get to basically, in essence, have a mental Rolodex. And then you're also seeing who's actually closing deals, who's actually bringing in money, who is potentially leaving money on the table to then create an opportunity to then communicate that to someone, get on a desk, and then hopefully be an agent. And where Charles King did it in a way that is just, again, makes him a North Star, is once he learned that, instead of saying, okay, cool, I learned it, I'm at the top of my game, he literally was like, no, why am I here? I'm here, again, to that earlier point, to make sure there are a myriad of people who look like me, right? Because again, as we can see from a talent perspective, there's an overabundance of Black talent. And don't let anyone tell you that that's not the case. However, if there's not an overabundance of Black agents, right, then literally half of the equation is potentially unbalanced. I'm not saying it is unbalanced, but it's potentially unbalanced. And so again, that was very important to me in terms of learning that aspect. And so even though I didn't go into the mailroom, that was always on my mind. And before I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity that I have now, working at Sony, I also had several clients. So I had several independent clients for years and years and years. So whether or not there was writers and directors, artists, hip hop artists, rappers, singers, so forth and so on, whatever I could do, whenever someone needed me and had a question, whether or not it was regarding a situation or regarding a contract that they were negotiating, that's arguably what I did for the first phase of my career. And I think that what that allowed me to do is firsthand, from a contractual basis, I recognize that ownership is the bedrock of everything, because it is both your bargaining power, it is your creative power, it's your financial power. And I think all three together, you know, for lack of a better trinity, that's freedom, right? Because that's literally when you have those things, now you have the power to potentially say no. You have the power to wait. And to your point, Evan, you have the power to take the archive of what you created. And when the opportunity presents itself, you have full authority to monetize that and control it creatively, because you're not like, oh, I have to do it now because it no longer belongs to me, right? And that gives space and time really to maneuver in a way that is organic to who you are versus whoever owns it basically gets to dictate where it goes.
Yeah, and I told somebody the other day that, you know, on Guinness World Book of Records said that Pharrell's song "Happy" is the most streamed song in history. I don't know the particular number, but it's been streamed billions of times. But I said, you know, Pharrell isn't a multi-billionaire. So I said the turning point for us is the economic power of the ownership when it comes to owning a lot of our stuff. And the thing is, I feel that a lot of companies have gotten away with that in terms of I'm a writer, I've written for other publications, but I'm like, why don't I get even like a 0.01% for every click? So I feel like that's the turning point of search engines, of the internet, of ownership, of every aspect you see, from sports to every idea. Every idea should be able to be monetized, not compartmentalized by a pay wage.
I think that is spot on. Monetize versus compartmentalize. And I think that part of it also too is, and I'm iffy about saying this, but I kind of believe it. If you think about it, our time in this space, we haven't been here a long time, right? So, and not to kind of go back to civil rights, but I think it's sometimes important to mark time, right? So arguably on paper, right? So we kind of start with like the Civil Rights Act. It was theoretically only with the Civil Rights Act, quote unquote, that we were actually free and on paper free, right? That's the mid 60s, right? So it literally means it's only been approximately 60 years, and just for the sake of the conversation, speaking only about America, right? That Black people in America on paper have been free, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because of that, arguably, even though we obviously have had a significant impact on this country in general since the minute we were stolen and brought here, right? But arguably, even before that time, we had a role in, you know, arts and culture, and we were amazing and phenomenal, you know, with the Renaissance, Harlem Renaissance, and in the 20s, and even before that, right? But using kind of the mid 60s as a marker, it's only been about 60 years. And so because of that, if you actually on some levels, and I'm gonna make a different argument in 2 seconds, look at how quickly we have actually basically like started to really own stuff, I'm flabbergasted about what's about to happen. So think about it, to your point, you have people like Jay-Z, you have people like Ava DuVernay. And the reason I'm gonna bring up, and Charles King, and the reason I'm gonna bring up Ava DuVernay is there is a certain level of actual freedom that comes from, you could have Black Panther, but because you were too busy, right? Or you wanted to literally, not, I'm gonna say it a different way, because you had something else creatively that you knew based on how you tell stories you were better suited to do, that you were gonna not only, this is the key thing, is you didn't pass on Black Panther, you said, you know what? I have this amazing project I'm working on. You know who you should talk to, who I think is great for this, and this reason, Ryan Coogler, right? So to be in a Black creative space and literally be able to choose projects, but more importantly, if you don't want a project, to be able to hand it over to one of your other Black colleagues. And the reason I say that is because I think we're starting to understand our power. We're starting to control. We're starting to, even for instance, I know that Viola Davis, I think it's Juvie Productions, a Small Axe I just saw, and I know the person who did Small Axe, but even for instance, oh, this is a good one, Tiger King. Did you see? Is that what it's called? It's on Netflix, based out of India. I think it's called Tiger King.
It's called White Tiger.
White Tiger. Oh my God, I'm getting Netflix and the other Tiger King mixed up. Forgive me, everyone. But I think that was executive produced by Ava DuVernay. And the reason I'm bringing those as examples is that I think that in the last, and I think it started in the 90s, right? And again, there's a generation before. I just don't know that generation firsthand, right? But in the 90s, I think that's when we started basically having this conversation about ownership, and the groundwork was there, right? Even for instance, there's a lot of people who have been in this game that we don't realize how long they've been there. Regina King, right? So think about it. She literally was on 227, and now she is creating like One Night in Miami. Like that was, it was phenomenal. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And so to see her maturation and to see how she's evolved, again, think about it, in that's about a 30-year span. Yeah. The reason I'm going to say that is I think 20, 30, 40 years from now, what we're going to see is, if we kind of look at it from like a data analysis forecasting, that our trajectory is going to be exponentially quicker than some of our other counterparts. Yeah. Right? Because kind of we're finally getting our foot in, and not only our foot in, and the reason I mentioned the 90s is arguably there was the 90s, then there was another wave that was, the Black Panther and Moonlight and all this amazing content, right? And I have a feeling the door was about to shut, right? They were about to move on because things always come in waves, right? There's a wave where the gatekeepers decide we're cool or whatever the case may be, right? And so there's a wave. The wave possibly was literally about to go out to tide. And fortunately, we were able, and choosing my words carefully, mobilize around an egregious illegal event and literally say definitively, you must listen to us. That we are here, we are not going anywhere, and literally we are choosing that even though we cannot necessarily control the system, how we respond to the system is going to change. And so we are no longer on some levels going to code switch in the way that we were. We are no longer going to have inside conversations where we say things amongst each other, but we don't say it outwardly, right? So we're going to say, I've had enough. I can't deal with this. It upsets me when people say things like, oh, well, can't you talk more this way? What do you mean? Well, you know what I mean. No, I don't know what you mean. Well, can't you talk with more of a whatever? No, my parents are from Jamaica. So if you want me to speak with like patois, but I wasn't born, I don't know what you're asking me, right? And so it's sometimes having the freedom to say that because there are other people who have come before you, so you can use an exemplar, right? So oftentimes what happens is, because we're the only person in the room, it becomes too personal. But because now I feel like we have more and more Black art out there in what I consider to be a Hollywood-facing perspective. And even though it's not where it needs to be at all, but we're starting to have more Black creatives, and not just Black creatives and Black executives, but again, Black independents, like right on all levels of the sphere, right? That now what it allows me at least to do is, when I have conversations, I can use a common touch point, which is pointing to another person, right? Or pointing to a piece of art, because now I can use that piece of art to explain how I feel, right? Because it's almost like validating the data. So for instance, it allows me to say something to the effect of, when I'm having conversations and I say to people, we're really leaving a lot of money on the table. The fact that we oftentimes, specifically in Hollywood, but also sometimes I think as Black Americans, we forget about the entire Black world, right? So we forget that there is the Americas, first of all, right?
The diaspora of what it means to be Black, and it's interesting.
Right. And so what that means in terms of not only the consumption of content, but where we send our content, right? So it means that there is a whole set of people who may be like, oh my God, I love Black American content, because it's familiar enough because they're also Black, but they're Black Brits, or they're in Nigeria or whatever. So there's a commonality, but then there's also some kind of a difference because it's American, right? The reverse is also true, in the same point that I don't know about anyone else, but I am just like living for all the content on Netflix that is literally created by and for people on the African continent. Yeah. Right. And it's like Queen Sono.
Yeah. Shout out to Queen Sono. I posted something about it yesterday, and then the star of it, Pro Thusi, reposted it, and then I looked at my story, and it was all these beautiful and African names, and my content had jumped up 3 or 4 times. So I said, wow,
And that's the point, right? Because I think that sometimes we forget that, so we have, and I'm gonna very deliberately not say it with like a twang, but in Jamaica, we have basically a saying, and I'm gonna like anglicize it. It basically means like, we're small, but we're mighty, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that sometimes what we forget in America, what I think we're 13%. Our influence is significantly greater than 13%, but we're only 13%.
Yeah, and in 1890 we were 19%.
Right, and in some places, in some states, right, we were like 60 to 70 to 80%, right? Yeah. Another conversation. But I think that sometimes what we forget is, again, there are islands in the Caribbean that are like 90% Black. There are continents in Africa that are 90% Black. There are places where from a unit number perspective, Brazil, right? The unit number of Black people in Brazil, and I could be wrong because my math may be off, but it could be more than those of us in the United States of America, in Colombia, right? So there are all of these amazing people out there that, again, have this through line. And again, back to, when you mentioned Black Panther, that's why Black Panther was so successful, right? Because even though for a lot of us, we may not be from a generational perspective, right? We're not first generation born in Africa, right? We were taken. And so we're African Americans or Black Americans, however we want to articulate ourselves, right? But there was this through line of familiarity, right? Where we're like, oh, but I get it because it's me. Like there's a through line where you realize we're not that far removed, even if there are some differences, right? And so I say that all to say that I feel like where we're going with ownership is both a ownership perspective and then an intellectual mindset perspective. Because now what we're recognizing is, oh, in order to own, and I think we've always done this, but now I think it's on the forefront, we have to create communities. We have to create alliances. We have to create partnerships. We have to have a group of people. So whether or not you have a group of writers that you bounce ideas off of, whether or not you have, a couple of lawyers who are friends on speed dial, so you can potentially bounce ideas off of them without them billing you for their time, right? Yeah. Also still buy them dinner or drinks or something. That's my recommendation. Try to get them earlier in their career, right? But to really create a sense of community. And I think that what that does is it allows you a safe space to bounce off ideas. And this is why, and this is my long-winded way of saying, because I think that oftentimes we're not given the space to show up and say, I don't know. So oftentimes when I was dealing with younger artists, sometimes they had no one to ask. So they had no one to ask about ownership, right? So not only had no one told them that they should be asking about ownership, they didn't even know that that was a thing. So first you need someone who is sophisticated enough to say, okay, cool, let's level set, right? Where are you? And what do you know about the industry, right? And depending upon what you know, then I potentially may need to do like a data dump and bring you up to speed kind of closer to where you need to be, right? And then you need to build a trust relationship so that the person feels comfortable saying, hey, like this is what I'm afraid of. Like when they were saying X, Y, and Z, like it kind of made me uneasy. And then also too, knowing that you shouldn't necessarily know what these terms mean, right? But I think we're kind of always have to put on this facade like, well, I know. No, you don't. And like, it's okay not to know. Like the beauty of where I am in my career. And I think as I'm kind of really trying to figure out what my next move is, and that's why I kind of say to myself, like, if I was to say I'm anything or what is it that I really do, again, I'm really an entertainment strategist because my intention as much as possible, and this is gonna sound corny, so the early iteration of lawyer was really counsel or counselor, right? And so that's really who I view myself as. I'm a counselor. I'm a legal counselor. It's my job to dialogue with you in the most honest, authentic way for you to pour out your heart in terms of what it is you want to do and what it is that you want to create. And it's my job to facilitate and make space to protect you and to potentially make you stronger so that you can go in the world and do that in a way that is authentic and beautiful and amazing and unencumbered, right?
And then and then to interject right there, one of my favorite movies is the Godfather, and they called the counselor the consigliere. Yep. And they help strategize those meetings, and they were there right at the table.
So Evan, I think we are kindred spirits, and I'm going to say it incorrectly. So I'm going to say it the two ways that I've heard it. So it's either consigliere or consigliere. right? And so I often make a joke that I am a conciliary for legal hustlers, right? So we all have a hustle, right? So sometimes I think there's a negative iteration of the word, right? And sometimes also too for like legitimate reasons, because we have not had a seat at a table and we had to make a seat, right? And I think that arguably as a culture, we're actually really good at evolving that, but that's a completely different conversation without validating it, but I am, weirdly, okay? But I think that especially in this entertainment space, we're hustling, right? Because it's not an easy thing to do. I think people who aren't in the space have a misnomer that they think it's like all fun and all glitz and all glam and all that. It's not. Like even like today, I had technical difficulties and that's why I'm a little bit like shiny because I was like, oh no, right? And I have a ring light over there and whatever, you know. Anyways, I digress. But so because of that, yes, to your point, it really is, if you think about it, in The Godfather, he talked to him about everything, right? That was arguably the most open relationship, even more so than his sons, because the role is not to tell you what to do, but to give you all the variables and all the options, right? And oftentimes I think as creatives, but specifically as Black creatives, further down the line, the right decision wasn't made because you didn't have all of the options. You didn't have all the variables. But if in fact you did have all of the options and all the variables, you would have either made a different decision or you would still have made the same decision, but now you would know why. Does that make sense? So for instance, there is sometimes a good reason for someone to give up ownership, right? Because sometimes it's a gamble, right? I think everyone always talks about, for instance, the young man who sang The Lion King in the first movie, and that his mom, brilliant, was sophisticated enough that instead of taking a one-time lump sum payment in exchange for his rights, he ended up getting back end and made like a ridiculous amount of money, right? Which is phenomenal because she is just astute beyond people who are arguably have been in the industry for like years and years and years. Now, this is the caveat to it that no one talks about. And I think this is the conversation sometimes we don't have, specifically as Black people. What if the gamble was wrong? Lion King could have been a flop. It wasn't. Disney, blah, 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 right? But it could have been a flop. And let's say they needed the money. So, and I don't know the numbers, but let's say they were offering $200,000. And let's say his mom made $30,000 a year. That is a huge payout for singing a 3-minute song. Yes, you have to go in the studio, blah, 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 whatever, right? But if you think about it just on its face math, that's not necessarily like, quote unquote, a bad deal. And if you needed that money for whatever reason, you wouldn't be wrong for taking it, right? But to me, and because maybe let's say you wanted to put a down payment on a house, there were things that you needed to do, right? However, there's a difference between not knowing you could take back end, right? And then choosing to take the money up front. I think a lot of people don't even know that they can actually ask for a back end. A lot of people don't know also too, and I'm just gonna give you this one example and won't go too much on a tangent. What a lot of people also don't realize is that I often have people all the time, you know, contact me, you know, pre my Sony world, and they're like, Sophie, I just need a standard contract. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And people are like, yeah, you know, a standard contract. I was like, no. What did you guys agree to? You know, whatever industry standard is. And I was like, so, but you know that industry standard person got screwed over. So do you want their deal? No, you know what I mean? No. It has to be a meeting of the minds. Yes, there are standard contracts, but every contract should be a meeting of the minds, right? So you tell me what you want, I tell you what I want. We have a brainstorming session about best case, worst case. Let's say this is like, you know, the next Black Panther, right? Let's say it's the next Small Axe, whatever it is, right? And then also worst case, let's say it loses a whole bunch of money. What are we gonna do? Everything in between. Let's talk that out, right? And then we put that into a contract. And arguably, unfortunately, a lot of people miss that in-between step. And the reason they miss that in-between step is because they don't have like a village of knowledgeable people, right? So that they can bounce ideas off of in a trustworthy space where they don't feel like they're gonna be taken advantage of, right? Because usually you can't say that to the person you're negotiating with because now they know you're not seasoned, right? But if you can pivot to a friend who literally, let's say, just did a deal at X, Y, and Z, or you have a friend who is a manager, or you have a friend who's an agent, or you have right, you have all the other people. Then what you can do is you can talk to them and literally listen and learn in real time, so that you know what questions to ask, you know how to even frame the conversation, so that in fact it is a conversation, and now you have clearly communicated what you want and you know what they want, to then make sure that the piece of paper matches that.
I love that. I love the whole explanation, because I feel like sometimes people are afraid to lean on their village or ask for help. And a part of a negotiation is to get the better end of that deal, but do it in a respectful business manner, right? You have so many scenarios where you have, for an example, you have some actors who only do one movie at a time deals and get that lump sum and the back end, because they know that second one they could leverage that to come into negotiations again. Some people sign three or 7 movie deals, knowing there'll be 8 more or 10 more opportunities to play that character again. So it's really being knowledgeable and doing what's best for you and your team.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think, but also too, and it's something, and I personally struggle with this, even though I always kind of at the beginning of the day always tell myself, like, no, you have to show up and be authentic. And part of showing up and being authentic means if I don't know, I have to find someone to say I don't know to. And this is gonna sound corny, even if it's the University of Google or the University of YouTube, right? To get me to a place where I can start to kind of figure it out, right? And I think that sometimes what we need to do is because, again, you know, it's almost like our Achilles heel. I think that to generalize, as Black people, again, we have not been given the space to say, like, we don't know, right? Like, and I'm going to be very honest with you, like, the number of times that I'm in meetings with people who don't look like me, and like, okay, let me say it a different way. Not where I work now. That I've been in rooms where people who don't look like me, and like, they're so unprepared. Like, to the point where I'm literally like, how do you still have your job, right? And if I am 100% honest, I don't have that freedom at all. Like, when I tell you I am like 3 months ahead in my job, like, that I learned technical applications simply to make sure that I'm so far ahead that I've thought about every potential scenario, so that when a question's asked, I almost always know the answer, right? But what I realize is, and even though I think that's kind of the reality in whatever space we as Black people, executives, professionals, creatives exist in, right? We almost always have to know the answer. What I realize is, again, that's an extra weight, because it doesn't sometimes allow me the freedom to sit in a room and be unprepared and just listen and just sit back and kind of let my brain daydream, right? Because again, if we're really talking about being creative, is that oftentimes that magic happens in that in-between space. That magic happens in the moment that we're still. The magic happens when we're not like running and being like, I have to. It's just when we are. When we have the ability to just be, that's really, to me, when you really get to tap into your creative inner center. And so I would implore everyone that, to me, what the last couple years have taught us, there are no rules, right? So, and I don't mean this as like to be as alarmist as it's intended, but there are no rules, right? Like, you can do everything right and it can go to, right? You can do everything wrong and you end up on top. Like, it's not. So to me, the only thing is to be true to yourself, and definitely be the most excellent version of yourself, but not your perfect version of yourself. So I always say, right, it's like excellence over perfection. Somehow I think as Black people, we have this perfection thing because we have to. And personally, I don't think it serves us. Like, I just don't think it does, right? But like, excellence means like whoever the best iteration of you, based on you, not based on what other people think, but like your own knowing, like, oh, yo, I'm dope. Like, yo, I got this. And if I don't got it, it doesn't matter because I'm still dope. Like, right? It's kind of like this inner sense of calm, of just knowing that you have value, even if you're not giving someone something of value. And I know that sounds really esoteric, right? And then I think that when you exist from that posture, you start to realize, oh, let me just try out and say, you know what? I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you explain that to me? And the irony is, when you do that, people will tell you. And because you want to know why? People really would love to talk, right? And if you do it from a posture of like, oh, I would love to learn from you, or like, no, I don't know what that is. Like, can you explain? Or can you give me an example? Whatever. You'd be amazed at how almost every situation shifts. And now, instead of you being the one who feeds into people, right? Because I feel like oftentimes as Black people, regardless of the space we're existing, we're normally feeding into people. We're either making them feel comfortable, making them feel better, giving them what they need, whatever. That's normally the posture. But we normally never have an opportunity to actually have it be a symbiotic, reciprocal relationship. And part of that is because we actually very much don't say we need something. Or if we do, we're doing it from such a place of like, they don't believe us, right? And I know I'm getting a little bit esoteric, but because we say it in such a way that like, oh my God, I got this figured out, I got this figured out, can I have your help? The person's like, but you just said you got all this figured out, what do you need my help with, right? Which is different than, I have this absolutely amazing idea. This is my idea. However, I'm having difficulty figuring out how to make the character's childhood trauma relate to where they now are as an adult, in the fact that they're actually no longer a victim, but they're able to actually encourage people to be stronger. Right? Do you see the difference in the, because I'm coming with a place of like, I have authority over what I'm doing, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm clearly kind of saying, but there's something, there's a causation I can't figure out. And to me, that allows someone to basically be like, oh my God, you know, I had that same problem when I wrote blah, 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 blah. And this is what I realized. Oh, I had to take sticky notes, and I had to literally create basically the pivotal moments in the person's life, right? As a child. And then I had to do the same thing as an adult. And then I had to take like, okay, from a psychological perspective, how do victims normally move through the world? They either unfortunately become victimizers, or they get stuck in the middle, or they literally overcome in such a way that they're an inspiration to other people, right? And that's just like a very kind of like generalized summary. And then what you do is you literally go and you go, once you put the Post-its on the wall or however you do it, then you see the pattern. And once you see the pattern, you're like, oh, I see the story. I see the arc. I see the connection. But somehow, if you had never said, I'm confused, if you had never said, I don't know how to get it from point A to point B, you didn't even realize that part of what it was is that you hadn't pulled the structure out in your head in a way that you could see it. And I know Post-it sounds like a really, it's like, oh, simple Post-its. But no, it's like, yeah, that's one way. You do Post-its, right? Because now you can see it in a way where you can actually see whether or not you color code it or the words or whatever, and you can see the connection. And so I say that all to say that I think that, yes, if we create villages, but also I think we need to be brave enough to say that we need a village. Mm-hmm. And then once we create the villages, and also recognize that oftentimes there are people in the periphery who've been actually saying, hey, I'm your village. Hey, I'm here to help. But because of pride or ego, and again, I get that, but because of all those things, we weren't brave enough to step out on a limb and say, okay, cool, like let me take them up on it and let them into what I don't know, because I'm very secure on not only what I do know, but more importantly, who I am. And I think that then creates that symbiotic relationship where like things can really grow and evolve. And now you navigate in a way where you're no longer afraid of not knowing, because you know how to ask for the answer.
Mm-hmm. And I always tell people, everybody wants to be wanted. And in the business aspect, when you involve people, it becomes pretty fun, especially if you point or highlight something that they're great at and says, hey, I have this, like you said, I have this great idea, I have this great team, I have this great organization, but I feel like you might be the missing piece because you could do X, Y, and Z, and I want you to be a part of this atmosphere and add to the atmosphere, add to the mix. Talk about how much, just a little bit about how much Hollywood is actually a incredible team sport. When we see a box office number, right? We see the little things went box office on streaming and in theaters, where the very little theaters open. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have Denzel, Jared Leto, Rami Malek, 3 Academy Award winners. But there's a lot of work that went into that film, not only on the actual set, but on the marketing side of it as well. how important is it to let people know that Hollywood is actually a really big team sport?
I think that's a great analogy. It is a great analogy, and this is why. To your point, it's really because when you really kind of take it, and I'm going to do it like very, very quickly, right? It's like idea, development, acquisition, production, or no, pre-production, production, post-production, marketing, PR, home entertainment streaming. Now that home entertainment streaming and exploitation is now the same, right? And then literally, like, then different geographies, different locations, because even though we're still all streaming, it's still, the IP knows your address, right? And that's why there is a time that like Netflix here, let's say in Los Angeles, was not necessarily the same as like the Netflix you could access in Kingston, Jamaica, right? Because they know where your IP is, so they're sending you content based on that. So I say all that to say that, again, you know, you can have this beautiful idea, this thing, right? But again, if you don't know how to develop it and how to create it into a thing, then you're stuck. Then if you don't know how to take this thing and actually put it into a visual moving medium or whatever the medium is, right? So again, production, right? Then again, you're stuck. If you then also too don't know how to sell the thing because you don't necessarily know your potential consumer or the potential platforms or the potential festivals, depending on where you want it to go, right? Then you're stuck. If you don't know or have a team, and again, both your team and or like a studio team that not only can market it, but can market it effectively based on what it is, the actual consumer base that's there, and also the potential consumer base, right? Because again, and this is where it gets tricky, and I can't remember, again, three great examples. Coco, Black Panther, and Crazy Rich Asians, right? They all did exceptionally well because from the very beginning, they had global box office. Like immediately, it wasn't just, we weren't going, oh, we're going to wait for the numbers. It was literally all at the same time. It was consumed because why? If you look at those three sets of people, right? So, and I'm going to be very monolithic when I say this, but like Latinx, Black, and Asian. I could be wrong, but if I was to just do pure math from globally, what's that? Probably 60% of the world. Yeah. Like of the world fits into one of those three categories. It's probably more like 80, right? Right. So I say that to say that then again, marketing, and then same thing, PR, right? And this is where it gets tricky because marketing and PR, sometimes we group them together, but they're slightly different, right? Because it's even knowing, and this is, I think, a good example. When arguably to me, Kerry Washington had been in the game for a very, very long time. Yeah. She is a seasoned actress. But when she quote unquote crossed over was an intersection of her role as Olivia Pope on Scandal. And then when she was in Django Unchained, right? Yeah. And if people remember that summer when the movie was coming out, she did press and hit the red carpet like the A-list star that she is. Like if you just even like kind of look at her the year before versus the year afterwards in terms of like her aesthetic, how she presented. Like she presented like, oh no, I have arrived, I'm here, I should have always been here, right? And to me, that, and I don't know her, but just from like my studying of her brain, that was part her from a PR perspective of making sure that people knew they were seeing an A-list actress, right? Because again, so much of how we see things is through patterns that we've seen before. So literally you have a haute couture dress as you're at Cannes, right? You're like, oh, she's somebody, right? Yeah. Versus kind of like a, very simple black sheath. It's like, okay, yeah, you're presentable, but you're not like just going, over the top in a way that makes sense. Even if you remember Jamie Foxx, go ahead, Evan.
And I like to say that adds to the mythos of a person as well, because they could literally wear the simplest thing ever 3 years later, but the myth and the narrative of them might be like, that is the best black dress we have ever seen her ever wear, even though she might have worn it 6 years prior. And I like that you use Kerry Washington as an example, because she's making herself an A-list producer now.
Completely. And also too, and again, I think you guys will kind of start to understand, like, I'm like very heady. Like I approach this from a very creative space, but I'm also like, I like to dig deep and really analyze and really like look at all layers of what someone's doing. So if you think about it also too, look at also how her aesthetics change. And I think it was very deliberate. So, and this is going to sound hella corny, right? But it's even normally on TV when there are smart people, and I wish I had my glasses that I don't have right next to me, but they wear glasses. And it sounds corny, but you put on glasses and somehow we think the person's smarter. It's just a cue. And so I say that to say that I think that also too, in the last couple of years, Carrie has changed aesthetically how she's presenting herself to us in a way that is commensurate with her shift in the industry. So talent, right, needs to be glossy and perfect and flawless, for lack of a better word, right? And there's a Hollywood aesthetic versus if you're behind the camera, we want people to pay attention to our mind and what we're saying and not necessarily the aesthetic and be wowed by our aesthetics. And I think, again, if you really look, she has done a very deliberate job of making that shift so that you view Kerry Washington, the actress, different than Kerry Washington, the producer. And again, she's playing on social cues. And again, to your earlier question, that's why all of those things, it's a team sport. Because if any of those players are not playing with the same intentionality, you can have an amazing thing, but it could not get where it needs to get because marketing was flawed. It could not get where it needs to get because acquisitions didn't realize, or sorry, not acquisition, but the sales team didn't realize, for instance, I'm going to make something up. I'm going to make something up. Let's say that the main actor was born in Timbuktu. Then make sure you go do press in Timbuktu. Right? It's like simple things like that. Like, as for instance, I always remember when Lupita Nyong'o, I can't remember what project it was, but like she was, I think, in Mexico and like did the interview in both English and Spanish. Right? It's sometimes having a PR person to know to cue the reporter to ask her the question in Spanish because she speaks Spanish.
Or
right?
or even when Bradley Cooper was doing foreign press for one of his movies and he spoke French, and then he lets you into the world, lets you into his world of how worldly he is. Like,
well said.
That reinforces that perception or changes that narrative depending on everything. And sometimes I don't think sometimes the public realize that that star or that person in Hollywood has to take a deliberate break or shift. We didn't see after American Sniper, which was really incredibly done. Bradley Cooper, we didn't see him in the public eye as much or press. That's because he was preparing for that role of him as a actor / director with the longer hair, sing for Stars Born. And now you have his next film, which is off of the, I forgot his name, but off of the amazing composer who did a West Side Story and a lot of other musical classics. That reinforces that idea of, yes, it is credible that Bradley Cooper is a director / actor. It makes even more sense.
And something you just said made me think of something, and I think this is also too, and this is why I think it's really important. And it sounds so cliche because I think we say this, but I don't think we know why we're saying this. That's why I think that, and this is more, this is a note to both creatives as well as kind of like people who are either executives or kind of want to go that route. You really need to know who you are, and this is why. So I find that oftentimes certain creatives, and funny thing is, weirdly, I'm included in this. I'm an extroverted introvert, but I'm an introvert by nature, right? So because of that, I think a lot of creatives by nature are actually very introverted, right? You're used to kind of existing and having conversations in the most beautiful way in your own head, right? So as you're writing a story, it's really that you're writing a story in your head. You're writing it down, but you're not really having a conversation with someone else. And so it is a very insular thing. And so the reason that I bring that up is you have to know that about yourself to then create a team. Because I think that's why, even more so than other groups, to your point, it is 100% a team sport. But arguably creatives are more likely to actually join non-team sports, right? They're more likely to kind of, use that analogy. They're more likely to basically be like, no, because other people don't understand me. And I'd rather bank on me rather than someone not understanding me. Yeah. And then I have to bank on the team, right?
I just had a conversation with my friend the other day who was a designer. And she says, I have a hard time trusting people. That's why I haven't had anybody on my team.
Right.
But I said, that's what the contract is there for. That's where your business sense comes in there for. She has a friend that's a lawyer that gives her advice, says, hey, shoot him the contract and then buy him lunch or then buy him dinner and say, hey, how does this look? And I says, if you don't like what somebody's doing and it's a 7-day contract and in the contract it says something along that language that you don't have to keep them until that 7 days, well then, rely on that, And there's a couple more questions we wanted to ask you as well.
No, of course. If you have not realized, I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Shout out to Chris Hudson for
shout out to Chris Hudson. And again, just to put him on blast, so he is a colleague of mine at Sony, and again, that's I think why I prize my role as co-president, because it allows me to meet other phenomenal, intelligent, legally minded, just sophisticated individuals, and for him to think so highly of me, to put me in contact, it was not only an honor, but also too, full transparency, it's Black History Month, and so it's like my busiest time of year. However, again, I think that through his act of community engagement and like connecting me with you, it was something I had to say yes to, because like this again is the bedrock of who we are, and I'm going to say this on purpose, as Black creatives, right? If we can't find time for each other, we either need to, and this is the caveat, or you find someone else to put in your stead. So again, back to the Ava DuVernay, Ryan Coogler, right? Because again, you need to be building the Rolodex so that, for instance, if in fact I didn't have time, I have enough of a Rolodex to go, okay, I may not have time, but let me point you toward this person. And the reason I believe in that is because we always want to give to the world what possibly we didn't get. Right? And I know that I existed through this and got to this place, and I had very few people who were literally helping. And when I did have the courage to say, oh my God, I can't figure this out, it's like no one was there. And so now that it's shifted, it is definitely part of, and I'm going to get it wrong of whether or not it's like lift as you climb or whatever the saying is, you have to make yourself available for this, because it's just part of your role of even just the fact that I get to exist in this space and work for a major studio and do the things that I do, that there is some semblance of pouring back into the community, which is the bedrock of why I did this and why I do this. So yes, shout out to Chris.
And I tell mostly everybody this. I even told Chris this, like, there's a niche for you in every possible space and corner of the world. The quote unquote stay in your lane, I don't want to hear that, because if Will Smith would have stayed in his lane, he still would have been the Fresh Prince. If people would stay in their lane, you wouldn't see the amazing people where they mean different things to different generations. Shout out to Queen Latifah being a star and role on CBS, and when I saw her as a young kid, was UNITY. Perfect example of she can fit in any and every niche possible, because that's what you do with your God's gift. You put it out there, and then people receive it.
No, completely. And I'm going to mess up the title of the book. I just started reading it. So Bevy Smith has a new book, and it is absolutely phenomenal. And one of the chapters in particular it talks about is not only the whole concept of what you just said of don't stay in your lane, be your lane, right? Create your own lane. But I think also too is having the freedom to stay in the lane, know you don't like it there, and then pivot, right? Because I think sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, is that oftentimes a lot of us are in jobs or careers that other people would deem as you have arrived, right? But because you are not being you, and you are not being authentic, and you don't have autonomy over your voice and your art and your whatever, right? You actually know there's something else in your heart and you're supposed to do. But because, again, the powers that be and the trappings that be say, like, no, but it's a great job or a great title or great money or whatever things it are, you're not brave enough to step out. And so I won't spoil it for you, but I would recommend reading the book, because, again, there is a chapter where she talks about really listening to your inner voice, right? And my interpretation of that is, I'd actually rather fail at being myself than succeed at not being me. Because at least for me, that anxiety would be too much. Because every day you're like, they're going to find out. They're going to find out. They're going to find out, right? Versus, and I think that unfortunately, I think that as Black people in this space, that's sometimes what we've been told we had to do, right? Up until this point, is that we had to fake it till you make it, right? And I'm like, no, you have to believe it until you see it. Now, it doesn't mean you don't learn the tools to then navigate around them. Oh, completely. Because you can't just be like, oh, I don't even have to. No, you have to know what the rules are, right? And know how to use them to your benefit. But you arguably can only be good at being yourself, right? So for me, I'm like, I'm good at being me, right? Because someone else, it's like, how am I going to do that? Because there is no real playbook. Because like, there's just not enough time to study someone enough to know, because all it takes is like one small difference, and there's going to be a difference, right? And I don't think we talk to people enough in an authentic enough way to basically say, oh, we all feel that way. But again, to your point, if you actually, at least for myself, look at exemplars of people that you admire, they didn't do that. They made their own lane, right? And because there's a lot of other people I think that we don't necessarily admire. And I don't mean that to be like condescending, but usually the people are the Jay-Z's, right? Which sometimes, I don't know if you've ever watched interviews, but like with him, I'm like amazed. Like his confidence from way back was, he's like, why would I ever feel like I don't belong in a room? Mm-hmm. Right? Because it means he knew it. Like, again, Will Smith, I think is such an excellent example, but it's also an excellent example because he's way headier than people give credit. I think I remember reading an article that like he did an analysis basically about like, basically looked for the last 20 years, the top grossing box office. And almost all of them were like sci-fi, right? Go pull up Will Smith's slate. It's almost all sci-fi, right? There's a formula. And so, the reason I say that is because again, that allowed him to stay in his lane, but own his lane because he knew the data associated with the decision he was making, right? But ask your question, because I could keep talking forever and ever and ever.
So we read in a recent report that only 2% of equity partners at large law firms are women of color, a statistic that has stayed the same for 20 years. I won't ask you what the cause of that is, because that's a very big question. Yeah. And obviously the totality of that doesn't fall on you. Yeah. I'm going to ask an even better question on what can we do to change that? What needs to be done to change that?
So funny thing is, so I was really fortunate to be on a Black History Month panel in October for our Sony Music UK counterpart. So in the United Kingdom, they celebrate Black History Month in October. And so because of that, it was the panel was kind of a little bit more career focused. So I, ironically, did the same thing you did. I kind of looked up the numbers, right? And I was like, well, how many Black attorneys, blah, 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 women, whatever, right? And I knew the numbers were horrible. When I saw them, it almost took my breath away. And this is why. I had a moment where I was like, oh, I probably actually know all the Black attorneys in Los Angeles. And I was like, that actually is scary. Yeah. No, real talk. Like, or at least I've come in contact with, because the unit number is probably so small, especially when you're talking, and this is to your point, that work in a law firm and that are women, right? So I'm going to tell you what I think we can do and why. So part of it is, I'm going to slightly put the ownership on us. So part of it is this. Part of it is that so many of our parents are literally like, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an accountant, right? And literally just telling us to do that, they think as long as we basically get into college and as long as we get into law school, we're fine, right? Like like you're good. But without realizing
there's another level.
There's another level, and you need a village, right? So even just being in law school, you need someone to help you traverse getting through law school, right? So you need someone to tell you what briefs are and how you actually read a case and brief a case. And yes, they're going to teach you as you go, but no, not really. It really is like a baptized by fire. They just throw you in there and you're supposed to figure it out. And what you'll realize is you're like, wait a minute, why are my friends seem like they're ahead of the game? It's because either their mom or their dad or their uncle, whatever, right? Because again, that's why I always make a demarcation in terms of like the Civil Rights Act. And when even we were able to like kind of quote unquote exist in these spaces, right? So for a lot of us, we don't have that familial legacy of someone who came before us to give us basically practical real world tips on how to, first of all, navigate, right? And then not only navigate, but then to navigate to figure out, okay, how do I actually do this law school thing? So in particular, I think why law school is so daunting, and if you have friends who are either lawyers or are in law school now, like give them a hug, right? It's because for a lot of people, it's the first time they went from being the smartest person in the room to no longer being the smartest person in the room, because everyone is smart. And I'm going to say this as well, and this is going to sound cliche, but I'm going to make it like a movie. It's like the only time, it's almost like the new 21 Jump Street, where like the jock is smart, the pretty girl is smart, the stoner is smart. Like every single person in that room was an overachiever. Every single person. So now you're taking the overachievers, and now technically within the overachiever, you're going to have the top and then you're going to have the bottom, regardless of how smart you were in your other world. That is very high pressure if no one told you that's what's going to go on, right? Because again, you went from a place where you're like, oh, I'm smart. And now all of a sudden you're like, not only do I not feel smart, but if no one helped me navigate how to do X, Y, and Z, to then get the best grades possible, to know to enter into a program, to get a summer internship, right? To know how to interview. And this is where it gets really tricky. And this is why I think that Insecure is a phenomenal piece of work. Like, I know we all love Insecure for a variety of different reasons, but I think that oftentimes Molly's character and Molly's trajectory in a law firm environment is sometimes lost. Like, we laugh, but like, that's so real on so many levels. And the reason being is, again, and I can't remember the young lady's name, but remember when there was this summer intern and she was a little bit too, quote unquote, unrefined, right? Mm-hmm. The reason that Molly literally had angst was because it's like, what do? Right? So here I just told everyone, be authentic, right? But I would probably be the first one to basically be like, no, but you got to tone it down. What kind of a hypocrite? I literally for the last however long have been telling you guys that if I am anything, I'm an amplifier of authenticity. But literally in that space, I would basically be like, no, but to get from point A to point B, you would have to tone it down to fit in with the cultural construct, which again is sometimes so foreign, so rigid, so conservative, even down to, and this is going to be maybe a controversial analogy, but like even from a body type perspective. So I'm going to say this for any of my women who are listening. I am very authentic yet deliberate about my aesthetic, right? So there are certain things that other people can wear that technically is appropriate, that based on my body type, I don't wear, right? Sometimes no one's having that conversation. No one's having the conversation of potentially size up, right? No one's having the conversation that yes, certain body types in a pencil skirt are gonna look different. Now, where are we going with this? Yes, someone is probably going to say, Sophia, that's wrong, time's up, me too. But, and that's 100% accurate. But the reality is, again, I am the type of person, I would rather give someone tools to then choose. But to not give someone tools to even know to literally do one thing over the other, that's how come we end up in situations where you have people go to law school who look like us, Black men and Black women, who literally no one was there to show them the way. So therefore they didn't necessarily get the best grades possible in their first year because it was just a shock, right? Which is, those are the grades that determine your summer internship or and though literally for the most part, that summer internship is usually where you work after law school. If you're going the big firm route, right? Then secondarily, again, firm culture is very old white boy. So again, you have the cultural construct of you're literally a fish, literally that they sometimes don't even see, right? The way that they form cohorts, the people that they include on their team on a big case, all those things, it's that typical being invisible times a gazillion, right? And then the last part is, and yeah, as you can tell, this is something I love to talk about. The last part, and then I'll tell you what I think we can do, is that the bar itself is way harder than people think. And this is why. And this is a tricky one for me. So I think I mentioned to you that my mom retired as an organic chemist. So she actually was a professor. So she was a professor of organic chemistry for a myriad of years. And then she went on to the administration side. And so because of that, like academics and education is very much a part of my life. And so because of that, what we don't realize is this whole testing bias is real. right? And so again, unfortunately, because oftentimes parents don't realize, so they're just like, oh, go to law school, whatever, right? That oftentimes no one's telling us like the importance of passing the test. You being smart is actually irrelevant. The only thing that matters is can you or can you not pass the bar?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so unfortunately, I think that a lot of people get stuck there because they don't realize how to take and study for that actual test, recognizing that there are social and cultural things that sometimes disproportionately affect Black people, right? So that certain of the analogies or the inferences your brain won't make if you don't know them to be true. Right? And so, and so, because think about it, it's written from a very linear prism. And if you don't even know what that prism looks like, and prism, not prison, but prism looks like, then you're lost, right? And then add on a whole nother layer, and this is where socioeconomics comes. And again, it's not all of us, but it's also too, sometimes our parents will basically, if I said, you know, I need $1,000 for bar prep, some parents would be like, that's stupid. You 100% need to spend $1,000 on bar prep. And this is why. And this is where the legal profession gets so tricky. And it may have changed, but at least for the, no, I think it is all bars, but at least for the California bar, when I was doing bar prep, they taught us, and this is where it gets really, really tricky, multiple choice, A, B, C, D, E, right? The answer could be A, but if the majority of the people say the answer is B, the answer now becomes A and B. So there is certain bar prep, which literally has the majority of people. So basically what the bar prep is saying is just do what we tell you. Because even if we're wrong and the majority of you do what we told you, you'll also be right. So it's buying into a club, right? And so that's also why, so again, I think what we can do and how we change it, right, is multiple things. First of all, we educate ourselves on the process of getting into law school. So that's a whole nother conversation in terms of the LSATs and so forth and so on. So again, that's testing. So it's not just your grades, it's testing. Literally creating more transparency from the people who have gone before, because again, most Black lawyers were traumatized. And unfortunately, because they were traumatized going through law school, they don't share those experiences, but they need to. They need to literally do a data dump and literally make sure that the new class that's coming in, that they're sharing that information in terms of what to expect, how professors are going to talk to you, how your fellow students are going to ask you for help, but not invite you to their study groups. So they know you're smart, but somehow they don't invite you to the study group. Like, so the whole normal racial BS that we're dealing with in our normal life. Now imagine it's like hyper-focused, let alone some people are looking at you like you only got in because you're Black. So it's just so many things that in a microcosm, right?
That reminds me of the phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations, in terms of knowing that only 2% have held that position. You even moving into that world, even though might not even be your goal, that added pressure on you to reach and aspire and go to those lanes.
And to your point, the soft expectations, and this is the irony is, and this is why I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. Being a barred attorney in California is something that I hold with a sense of pride, but also it's just that I passed a test.
Yeah.
So the soft expectations is that shouldn't be the pinnacle, right? And so oftentimes we're like, oh, just go to law school, and that's a pinnacle, but within ourselves. Does that make sense? Whereas suddenly like, no, what do you want to use that thing to be? That shouldn't be the thing. It should be like, okay, what did you do when you took that experience and that piece of paper and passing the bar and so forth and so on? What did you do in the world with it, right? And so I think if we have more honest conversations about the reality of how hard it is, the reality of specifically law firms, how misogynistic, racist, homophobic, like it's just not other generated. And arguably, and I don't mean it like it sounds, the people who look like us, you'll realize it's like everyone seems the same, right? And so again, and this is a key thing, is I tell people, I have certain friends, I tell do it, right? Because we're all different, right? Certain people fit in a different space. So certain friends I tell do it. Me, if I had to do it over again, I'm not sure if I would. Because I think, as you guys can tell, like I'm very much like, oh, I'm going to draw my lines this way today, and tomorrow I'm going to draw my lines this way today, and today I'm going to draw a box, and tomorrow I'm going to draw a square and call it a box, and then draw a circle and a triangle, right? Because I'm okay with existing in my own mind, in my own space. And to me, for the most part, the initial part of being a lawyer, that's not what it is. It is very much rigid. this is the law, this is what you do. And I think the irony of it is also too, the last part is we don't create enough space for the fact that we're always only thinking about lawyers working at a law firm when, and I don't know the statistics, but I think it could be as much as like 65% of lawyers don't work at law firms, right? And of that, arguably a huge percentage of that, and it could be anywhere between like 30 to 40, don't work in quote unquote traditional legal jobs. So again, I would argue almost every high level creative kind of executive within Hollywood, I guarantee you they went to law school, at least 25%, right? There is a mindset of, again, your ability to think, your ability to reason, your ability to kind of pivot very, very quickly that you either learn in law school or you had before, and that's what sent you to law school. And that's what then also too, when you got out of law school, made you pivot quicker to not necessarily go to a law firm. Does that kind of make sense? So again, if you kind of start and look at a lot of people's resumes, at least again, 25% of agents, managers, people who run studios, especially in a lot of studios, the chief operating officer is most likely a lawyer. Like if you really look at the high level C-suites, I guarantee you the people are literally either an MBA or a JD and or both. And it's because of a certain mindset. And so I say that to say that I think that we would also be better served as a larger Black community of educating our young people to the myriad of things that they could do, but then also giving them an actual game plan. So instead of just basically being like, oh my God, you could be an agent, of telling them why actually going to law school and then potentially working in the mailroom is a good idea. Or that, again, if you have a cohort and you're young and you want to basically be the next Charles King and you know an Evan Jackson and you know the next Ava DuVernay and you know the next Kerry Washington, then build together, right? And then literally package those people as your own agency, kind of similar to what you would do at Prodco, right? Right? And literally take that to an agency. So to me, if I had known,
what's a
so for instance, sorry, and I said that incorrectly, like a production company. Okay. So for instance, and I'm giving away, not a secret, but this is what I should have done if I had known better, right? I should have, the number of people that I knew when I was helping a lot of people with their contracts and so forth and so on. And one of the things that I'm really, really good at is I'm really good at spotting talent. Again, I wanted to be an agent, right? So what I should have done is very early on, I should have basically been like, okay, you guys, I'm going to be your unofficial agent, right? Let me kind of get my feet wet, whatever, right? And then usually also too, there's like a rhythm to like when you can see people's like career kind of starting to like, it's just about to move, right? And that they need, to be connected with a bigger thing. And again, sometimes it's a bigger agency. What I should have done is I should have said, okay, cool, I'm gonna be your agent, right? And I'm gonna kind of like, as if you're a portfolio, I'm gonna take you, Evan, you the next Carrie, you the next Ava, and take you into an agency. Because now I have leverage, right? That literally I can show you're about to be the next person. You're right there. And I come with this person. And then I say to them, I don't want to work in the mailroom. I've already read all those agreements, whatever. Give me a shot. Allow me a 6-month trial, a 1-year trial of basically like using your letterhead, for lack of a better word, because oftentimes that's really what you need, right? To go out and make deals. And if I'm able to make deals and bring in this amount of revenue, then literally I'm going to jump steps. I'm not working in the mailroom. I'm not sitting on a desk. I'm going to be an agent literally a year from now, because basically I brought you in revenue that you are eating from literally doing nothing, more so than potentially literally letting me use your letterhead and putting me on your email. Because again, think about it. Even pre-pandemic, we could have done this from our home.
Yeah.
No one knows whether or not you're in the office or not, right?
Yeah.
And so I say that to say that it's literally, I think, and that's why I kind of give us grace in terms of the fact that if you really think about it, we haven't been playing in this space that long. And so I think that's why we're at a really pivotal time where we're going to start to have more creative conversations like that, right? Where it's literally like, oh, you actually don't need to do it that way, but you do need to know how to bring value to skip steps.
Yeah.
So if you want to skip steps, you can't just be like, oh, I'm smart. No, I'm smart. And literally not only here's how I will make you money, also too, more importantly, in that same scenario, if the cohort, right, you, the next Carrie, the next Ava had agreed, and let's say I already had you under contract, I would also have financial numbers of how much money you have already made, right? And again, and this is where we start in those conversations of, you know, surrounding yourself around other people who are like-minded. And like-minded means like curious, eager, right? In terms of whatever their discipline is, because that's when you, let's say, bring to the table, if let's say an agency didn't have a presence in Africa. And again, we keep saying Africa, it's a continent, right? So to me, you bring a presence on the continent, right? And especially, this is the key thing, is if you know your numbers, then literally you can find the right person to say yes. And this is where it gets tricky. And if you don't, then that also tells you something.
Yeah.
And then that leads you to basically be like, oh, then maybe I actually don't need their letterhead, because I'm going to go directly to market and I'm going to make these relationships and I'm going to percolate up. Does it make sense? And now you will have more macros, right? Because you have multiple exemplars of some people who went through the traditional agency route and then just created something phenomenal and new. Because like what he's created to some people seems like it's basically the same scenario. It so is not. We have not yet fully even realized what that is going to manifest into, even though it is amazing as it is right now. But it's really kind of having the breath to really say to ourselves, okay, if we're gonna literally be us, and that's as an individual, right, person or spectrum, how do I do that in a way that makes sense and allows me to articulate the value that I have? And it really is starting to have those conversations. And again, if the individual person isn't business minded, literally, and sometimes it sounds corny, but like just say to the universe or say to God or whoever you believe in, like, oh, I need a business-minded person, because that person can often in 2 seconds, I'm exaggerating, but have a conversation with you. And again, basically like, oh, this is what you need to do, right? And whatever worry you thought had to be solved this way can actually be solved that way, because again, that person already sees you have value. And again, it's kind of sometimes also too, that sometimes people in terms of their partnerships, they're trying to partner too high up. And I always say to people, create a partnership on your same level and grow, because literally as you do that, there's a different level of respect and there's a different level of the same hustle, right? But sometimes when you're going too high up, they're just kind of like, oh yeah, we'll say yes, but they're not really rooting for you, because in their roster, whatever their roster is, you could be number like 100. Shoot, you could be number 2,000, right? Versus with going to someone on your level, right, who potentially only has 2 clients, whatever the analogy is, right? That person is literally like, they rocking with you. Does it make sense? Every single meeting they're in, they're mentioning you, Evan, right? They can be in a meeting that has nothing to do with entertainment, and they're still going to, if they're, again, curious, hungry, good at what they do, they're a legal hustler, they're going to find a genius way that in every single conversation, they're going to bring you up in a way that someone's going to be like, oh, wait, how come you haven't introduced me to Evan? Right? And so I think it's having, and so that's how I think that we ensure that there are more Black legal professionals. Again, kind of the similar conversation we've been having is really starting to be transparent with our information, being transparent with our experiences, and the good and the bad. So the secrets that we've learned that made it easier, the tricks of the trade. So again, same thing, even if it has to do with like someone not being organized, learning that there are applications and tools to make you more organized, like, you know, using your calendar, using, I'm going to use this as an example. So, I have ADHD, right? So I'm, as you guys can tell, very much like this. So because of that, if you look through, like, let's say my emails and so forth and so on, I am very structured to the point where you would never think I have ADHD. And that's because I fully accept that I have ADHD, and I fully accept and actually like the fact that my brain is going to go in a million different directions at once. However, I have a job that things have to be done at a particular time. So what I've done is I've poured my creativity and I've poured that neurodiversity, right? That my brain just thinks differently than non-neurodiverse individuals. And I've put it into a structured format, right? And what that actually does is it keeps me on point, but it also gives me the freedom to then have moments like this, where I can do this because, again, I've already planned ahead. So that allows me a moment to take a breath and to really be myself. And so I think it's sometimes even just sharing those kind of practical examples of who someone is, because someone may go, oh, I never thought about that. Like I use, like Excel is my best friend. People are always like, we know, Sophie, put it in Excel. But I'm like, it's just amazing. You keep track of everything. Hello, like how do you not love Excel?
and to get to your point earlier, that's what I did with Young, Bold, and Regal. I reinforced my team and I says, hey, and this is how I started my career with Young, Bold, and Regal, is that if LA Times says they don't want this article, if this person is not contacting me, I'm going to go out there and cover these events myself. And what I learned is I have actually had more access on the ground level and more levels of being myself, of doing it the way Young, Bold, and Regal does it, more than anybody else. And when I bring my team members in, I don't necessarily put a hierarchy. If it's a senior correspondent, of course, especially if they could do it greatly, right? But if somebody is a journalist from Missouri, which actually happened, she says, I'm very well knowledge, I'm very well versed. Within that week, we had interviewed Jamie Foxx.
Wow.
So something like that, where it's like, I don't believe in the hierarchy in terms of that way, in terms of Young, Bold, and Regal can cover the Oscars, but we can also cover a first-time event of somebody or first-time award show that nobody's ever heard of, because we have that type of agency and our brand mission is focused in on that. So when we do meet up or we do have conversations with those bigger companies, it's coming from a sense of a viewpoint of strength and power on what we've done versus being acquiescent to their power or strength, which is essentially what negotiations are.
No, I mean, well said. And again, just to reiterate what you said, it's because you have really thought about who you are and then created an environment and a business around it. And that's, I think, what I encourage everyone to do, right? And even if they don't actually have a business, you do have to have some semblance of intentionality of who you are and what does that mean as it relates to either your art or how you're going to move through this space. And I think, again, that's sometimes a conversation we don't have. We're just kind of like, oh, you're talented, you'll be fine. And it's like, no, it's because we're setting people up because we're not actually nurturing them through the process. And I think that, yeah, I think, and even to your earlier point about why am I blanking? Sylvia's love letter. No,
Sylvia's love, yeah.
Yes, it's that it's because we need sometimes time to move from a place of love and not from a place of trauma, right? And so because of that, we just need a moment sometimes where like someone gives you a hug, and to me, a hug means like I'm gonna sit down and literally be like, okay, cool, what do you need? Right? Without basically being like, oh my God, you're fine, move over, or saying something. And I think this is sometimes detrimental of using someone else as an example to invalidate what you're feeling or what you're going through. Like, because that person did it, I don't know why you have a problem. No. It's more like, okay, cool. Like, let me just listen to you sometimes, right? And let me really listen and figure out how I can support you. And sometimes that support is information, and sometimes that support is just support. Right? So sometimes it's just having a sounding board. And I think that oftentimes, creatives, again, their sounding board is only themselves. And they sometimes don't have a productive, nurturing, or loving sounding board of someone else. And so again, if you're fortunate enough that you are your loving, nurturing sounding board, you've already won. Real talk. And I know that sounds like kind of isolating, but really, if you're kind of good with being by yourself and literally kind of like saying, oh, I got this, like I just need to take a break, but I can do this, then you've won. And then the second step is if you can kind of be brave enough to, put your toe out there a little bit and to find other people who will see you in the best light. And again, not have soft expectations for you. So definitely, encourage you and give you practical steps and hold you accountable for being the best version of you. But again, in a loving environment, because on some levels, Hollywood is going to do this. Hollywood is going to kind of punch you, right? So you don't need your friends to punch you, but you do need your friends to hold you accountable. And I know that specifically for me, even being the co-president of the Black Employee Business Resource Group, it's something that I wrestle with because I am definitely not a soft expectation person, period. So I often do have people say, well, your expectations are too high. And I'm like, no, they're not. We're one of the last 5 major studios. And so to me, when I think of events, I think of it on that level. We may not have a budget on that level, but in terms of the execution, because to me, for lack of a better analogy, how I view our members, so both Black employees and allies, I view how much do I respect them, right? And to me, I should not respect them less than we respect our consumers of our content, right? Because we would never give our consumers subpar or lowered or soft expectation content, right? We just wouldn't. So how I view everything that I do, especially from me giving, and then anyone kind of within my cohort, I really say to themselves, okay, how do you view you as a Black person, and how do you view Black people? And that should be the output, not anyone else, if that kind of makes sense, right? It should really be, and to me, we're excellent, amazing, dynamic, beautiful, flawed, phenomenal. Like, we're just all of these amazing things. So for me, whatever I do, especially if I'm doing it in the construct of that space, and to me, it's everything I do, like I walk with it in everything I do, then it's only from a place of love that I would never have a soft expectation. Because to me, a soft expectation isn't love, it's paternalism. Right? And paternalism isn't parent, right? There's a negative connotation, which really means that I actually believe you are a child. And the reason I believe you are a child is because you don't have the wherewithal to make decisions for yourself. That is condescending and wrong, right? Which is different than, to your point, we are coming as equals, regardless of our title in a hierarchy, right? Everyone I come in contact with, we're equals, right? So I'm going to respect you accordingly, right? And therefore, the love and the nurturing I give you is from a place of adult to adult, right? So it means that once you've articulated to me your expectations and your levels, I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And if for any reason where you are is subpar to where I'm existing in my space, right? And again, not from a place of hierarchy, but from a place of whatever, then I will pass you on to someone who is orbiting in that sphere. Does that kind of make sense? Because we all exist in different spaces. And so sometimes you do need space, right? But you need people who are kind of existing in your way, right? And this is gonna be a bad analogy, but it's literally kind of like impressionists versus realists. Right? It's a different art form. So on some levels, one artist can't necessarily ask the advice of another one, or if you do pointillism, like the other person who doesn't even know what pointillism is going to be like, why are there all these little strange dots? That's stupid, right? Because they speak completely different languages, and I think that we need to.
And then in Hollywood, everybody knows you need the impressionist and the realist. You need the person to create and develop that art. You need that person to, on the business side, to develop that art even further through the business end of things. And to wrap up this beautiful and amazing conversation, what do you want your legacy to continue to be? Because my insight on talking about you right now is that, of course, you're amazing Sophia Stanley Esquire, but that Esquire you utilize to help your own people, to help people at large, to understand the strategy of their ideas and to further it across the universe. That's the message I feel where your legacy continues to be. But from your own words, how do you see it from your vantage?
Ooh, Evan, you almost made me cry. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. I'm gonna point to another piece of art, and also forgive me if you guys can hear this. I actually also live with I have my sister's boyfriend. I consider my brother, and he's a musical genius. So I think he's about to have a session. The world that we live in, working from home. So if you hear the music, that's what's happening. He's probably creating a song as we speak.
Yeah, it's creating the moment for us right now.
Yeah, right. So I would say, I don't know if anyone's seen the Black Godfather, but basically if they know about Clarence Avant. So I would say that I would want my legacy that I created space for people, regardless of their intersectionality, right? So regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of those things, right? But specifically, right, that I was a actual practical inspirational example to Black people to fully embrace who they are, to take up space, and to navigate this world in a way where they are aware of the reality, but they recognize that in our DNA, we're alchemists and we create whatever we want to create. That I'm a strong believer in, this is going to be a little bit too, so I believe that it's my job to hold the mirror of God up to your art form. And that how I view God, God is love, and God sees you as you're perfectly intended. And that there's nothing you can do that God will not love you. And that the purpose of your life is to do what that thing is that you're meant to do. And oftentimes we get stuck in the noise of everyone else's idea of who we are. And that stops us from actually the intentionality that God wants for us. And so my job is to hold the mirror of God to people so that they see that literally if they simply know who they are and they walk it, the manifestations, they will come. Because it literally is just the essence of being and walking in the totality of that what is meant to be, it's just another more beautiful iteration of who you are. And that if there is just one person who could say that I helped them to get there, then that's what I would want my legacy to be. And if there's more than one, then I'm beyond humbled and happy that I did what I was supposed to do with my time on the earth and with my ability to orate and strategize in the way that I think that I was put on the earth to do and to bring forth other creative souls.
That's a really amazing, really beautiful way to end this. I wouldn't say interview, I call it a conversation.
I love that, a conversation.
Conversations, because these conversations and shared stories will be shared on to somebody else. Somebody will see this and get inspired.